overperform their sort of stated goals or objectives or things like that. I mean, they go above and beyond all of the time. And so every, couple of days, my mother would relate an experience about a kindness that didn't have to be done, didn't need to be done by a member of the staff or faculty.
Hi, I'm Agnes Stawicki, Managing Editor with Comfort Life. We're speaking with insiders from Canada's leading retirement communities and care providers to uncover insights to community lifestyle, care, culture, and leadership. This includes insights from residents, family members, and administration. This is the Comfort Life Insider Perspective.
First of all, some context. I saw Wentworth Heights once, pre-COVID. And that was when my mother was beginning the process of sort of deciding to transition. She had been living for the past 20 years up in a cottage up just south of Owen Sound, and had decided that she wanted to sort of start to transition down. And she is somebody who had academic training and professional training in geriatric medicine and had been involved in a bunch of research across the province. So she was the one that did all of the work and sort of came on to this place. And so we got to tour it once when she put in her initial application. But then COVID came along. And so I have not been there or seen it or any of those sorts of things since she moved in. I live down here in Washington, D.C. I have another brother who lives in Phoenix, another brother who lives out in British Columbia. And fortunately, we have one of the four brothers lives still in Ancaster, where we grew up. And so he and his wife, who works at St. Joe's Hospital, have a chance to interact with my mom, on sort of a weekly basis and those sorts of things. It's been fascinating because of COVID. We tried to do the Zoom stuff, but she's not very good out of those sorts of things. But I talk to her every day. I call her at 3 o'clock every day, and have done that for sort of the last 17 months. And I have been through, you're obviously always on the lookout for signs of depression or things like that, but she's been extraordinarily happy through this whole thing. And I think the thing that impresses me the most is it's the people there. I think there are several stories, and they all have to do with people as much or more as with physical plant. And as sort of an overall impression, we've got sort of parallel experiences with my mother in a nursing home or a facility in Canada, and my mother-in-law in a facility up in New Jersey. And sort of being able to watch and compare the differences in experiences, the differences in sort of the commitment of personnel, that sort of stuff. The people at her facility constantly overperform their sort of stated goals or objectives or things like that. I mean, they go above and beyond all of the time. And so every couple of days, my mother would relate an experience about a kindness that didn't have to be done, didn't need to be done by a member of the staff or faculty at the facility. Little things. I mean, there was a period in time where they had to eat in their rooms. And so they would bring their dinner up. And she just jokingly said to one of the ladies, "Ha, ha, ha, you forgot my glass of wine," and just said it as a joke. And 10 minutes later, there's a knock on the door, and this lady brings her a glass of wine. She didn't have to do that. There's another lady who realized that these folks were getting, sort of stir crazy, and so figured out how to attach a wheelchair to the front of a bicycle, and would take out different folks, different residents, and for 15 minutes, put them in this wheelchair and just sort of pedal them around the grounds and things like that, so they could feel the breeze in their face, so they could feel those sorts of things. And you know, so you look at, you know, any good company, corporation, whatever, can write a brilliant mission statement. It is rare that they ever come close to it. This place tends to exceed it on a regular and frequent basis, and do it, you know, not grudgingly, but with great joy. And so, you know, the thing that strikes me more than anything else is that a lot of facilities, it's a job, you know, people are providing care, but they're doing what they need to do and that sort of stuff. The folks here seem to have an extraordinary passion to create and maintain a community that goes well above sort of the job description. I don't know what my mom's suite is like because I've never seen it. She would tell you that it is wonderful, that she feels extraordinarily comfortable there, that it is large enough that she doesn't feel trapped and she can move around and have different places. She very much enjoys having the kitchen service, you know, in the kitchen there, so that if she doesn't feel like going down for dinner or doesn't like what's at dinner, that she's able to cook for herself and things like that. The grocery stores are sort of right across the way. You know, she's able to have seating areas, bedding areas. She's got her crafts table and those sorts of things. And then the other thing I would say about sort of the social activities that is wonderful is that since COVID started, she and I have a standing 3 o'clock call, and half the time she's not there because she's down doing something. And that is, you know, particularly given the experience that we're going through with my mother-in-law up in New Jersey, you know, who has very little to do or chooses not to sort of involve herself. It's joyful, you know, she's never bored. She never feels trapped. There are lots of great activities and things like that to do. There's a beautiful library that she loves. You know, she's organized card games and all of that sort of stuff. And so from every report, it's just, you know, it's brilliant. I mean, they have pets there, they have stores, they have everything. Everything that she needs is really there. Yeah. I think it is improved in that she no longer has to feel totally and singularly responsible for every aspect of her life. You know, when she was living up at the cottage, you know, she had to worry about snow, ice, you know, getting wood for the stove, you know, what if you fall down, getting groceries, all of that sort of stuff. And so she feels far more kind of part of a community, that there are people that are around that can support her. And as you well know, as folks transition through age, one of the most difficult things that there is to sort of give up your independence and have that self-awareness that you do need help from people. And she's no longer sort of afraid or ashamed or reticent to ask people for help and know that it is always there, you know, for her. And so you just, you know, I think, you know, and particularly, you know, horrible experiences down here in a lot of some of these facilities about loneliness and about the degradation of the sort of mental acumen of residents, just because they've had to spend so much time isolated. And frankly, the reverse is true here. So she has more friends, more community, more interaction on a frequent and daily basis than she did, you know, when she was on her own. And so it's in many ways, you know, fairly invigorating. And as she has had to accept physical limitations, you know, in using a walker and stuff like that now, there was encouragement, you know, there are other people doing the same thing. And so you can see that it is, you know, not always necessary, but it's acceptable and not, you know, sort of a sign of weakness or something like that. But it seems like Schlegel, at least at my mother's facility, was, you know, always very clear about procedurally what needed to happen, but was, you know, also doing things in a way that tried to maintain, you know, mental health and give people hope and opportunity and that sort of stuff in a way that a lot of places, you know, weren't able to do. And, you know, certainly, you know, my brother was always able to come in, and they always sort of, they figured out, under COVID restrictions, they figured out how to do things, as opposed to down here where they were always figuring out why you couldn't do things, you know? I think the thing that I see that is unique, and again, I would say this without even having the comparison of the situation that we're facing in New Jersey as well. The situation is unique is that I don't consider anybody who works there to be an employee. They act, they demonstrate on a daily basis that they are committed professionals who want to go to the nth degree to make sure that their residents are comfortable. And it has nothing to do, I mean, they go well beyond their mission statement. They go well beyond what you would even sort of reasonably expect. They truly, truly are, you know, committed. I mean, in a way that you would see of, you know, people who are volunteers. I mean, you know, think about, you know, folks like Doctors Without Borders and things like that. They're there not because it's a paycheck, not because this is what they do for a living. They're there because their compassion and their desire to help people, you know, compels them to be there, and they act, you know, in that regard. And then the other thing that my mother would say that she appreciates very much, I can't imagine being an administrator in an assisted living facility, because you have, you know, hundreds of senior citizens with nothing to do who all know how to use email and demand answers to questions, you know, 28 minutes ago. The other thing that if my mother were on the phone with you right now, she would say the thing that she appreciates the most is how responsive they are to inquiries, how quick they are in answering those inquiries, and how they're happy to sort of explain not just what the procedure is, but why it has to be this way, and that sort of stuff. And so nobody's, you know, sort of left in the dark, or, you know, we don't get chocolate cake. I don't know why we don't get chocolate cake, but we, you know, we don't, or you know, those sorts of things. And so, you know, it's a wonderful, beautiful facility, but it's the people that are inside it that make all the difference in the world. You know, particularly for, well, I'll speak, 3 of her 4 children live dramatic different distances. And so I have a brother who lives in Vancouver. I have a brother who lives in Phoenix. I live in Washington, DC. And so if there is a problem or something like that, we can't, you know, it's 24 hours or 14 hours sort of before you could get there. When she was living up in that cottage by herself, particularly in the wintertime, we were worried about, you know, what if something happened? What if she got injured? What if she got sick? You know, what happened when there would be huge snow and ice storms and she would be stuck in, things like that. And so a comfort level, I mean, if you sort of grow down the grading of values, we know that she is safe with all certainty. Secondly, we know that there are people who care about her, who will check in on her on a regular basis, and those sorts of things. And then, you know, the kindness that is shown to her makes her feel, you know, valued and loved, and those sorts of things. And that, you know, and that is all, you know, sort of dramatically important. You know, so many folks end up in places like this and they're just, you know, sort of on the clock. I mean, they're waiting, you know, they're sort of ragging the puck, waiting for the end to come. She is living a full and vibrant life, full of interesting things, looks forward to and embraces every new day, is always remarking on how surprised she is at how busy and full, you know, her life is. And so the degree that that provides us with you know, a feeling of comfort and security and just sort of joy that she's not just sort of sitting there, you know, and that she, you know, that she's living a full and vibrant life is extraordinary for us. I could not recommend it more emphatically. When we first went up to look at it, when my mom put her name on the waiting list, they said, okay, it's about a year and a half, a year and a half wait. And so, of course, the two American sons, sort of took the lady aside and said, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, we'll build you a new gym. Can we get in? The lady said, no, no, you don't understand. Right below your mother on the waiting list is the former CEO of Tim Hortons. And I was like, okay, nobody's bribing their way in here. I would say that there is oftentimes panic, and when you realize that you need a facility, it's sort of like buying a home. You get panicked and you say, I need to, sort of pick something right away. I don't care how long the waiting list is to get into this place. It is absolutely worth it, because I cannot imagine, my mother could not imagine a better, happier set of circumstances for her to live in. And nothing, almost nothing in this world is ever as good as it's advertised. And there's always, you always say, okay, I think this place is perfect, and then you get inside it and you realize that it has this flaw or that flaw or that sort of stuff. And we have yet to find the disappointment within the context of this community. To start as soon as possible, because this will come on you often more quickly than you think, and you ought to be able to make a choice based on a wide variety of issues and things like that, as opposed to having the speed with which you can get in be the primacy of the decision. And so sort of the sooner that you can make that decision, the better off you are. One of the great things I like about Wentworth is also to recognize that your loved one is not going to be in a static state from the time that they are in there. I mean, while we wish it would be otherwise, there is going to be, inevitably erosion. And so is it a facility or is it a place that allows them to stay within as much of their familiarity as they erode, and as if they have to move from, sort of free living to assisted living to memory care and those sorts of things. Changing facilities or having to go and find a new or different place is, brutally hard on everybody, not least of all, sort of the resident. And so is it a place where they are able to transition through the various phases of the rest of their life? And I think that that would matter greatly and important. And then the last thing I would say is get away from the people giving you the tour and just sit in a chair and observe. Watch the people that work there. Watch the way, that they interact with the residents. Do they interact with the residents? Watch the way they're sort of conducting themselves, things like that. You can learn more about a facility, I think, by figuring out what time they serve lunch and going and parking your butt in a chair outside the entrance to the dining room about 20 minutes before lunch starts, because you can hear all the gab of the residents themselves. You can see the way that the folks in the facility are interacting and stuff like that. And that will, that is sort of an unguarded moment and will give you, sort of a really good sense of what that place is truly like. I'm not sure I can answer that with great accuracy, but again, she would have come at it from, first of all, a pragmatic standpoint of, having done a lot of field research on geriatric care and geriatric hospitals. She would have been able to identify places that were sort of not up to par or those sorts of things, and was summarily impressed in terms of facilities and things like that all across the board. I know that she had mentioned that one of the things that she found most encouraging was that even though it was not applicable to her at the time, that she was very impressed with the memory care unit. And when you look at the folks who had to transition into memory care, you know, a lot of times you're like, okay, they're putting these folks into a meat locker or whatever, but she said that their quality of life and their facilities were brilliant as well. I think she just sort of looked around and was able to see, you know, because you know, I mean, you can fake certain things, but you can't fake the totality of it. And so again, it was almost certainly, you know, just sort of the attitude of the folks that she interacted with. I mean, it was presented to us as sort of a done deal. And so we did not need to be involved in it. Again, you know, her professional background, she was interested in doing everything she could to make sure that this was not something that was sort of burdensome on, you know, her kids and her family. And so unlike the situation with my mother-in-law, where, you know, we had to go through, you know, a year and a half of home care and her firing, you know, she would fire a nurse at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'd have to get in the car and drive 6 hours up to New Jersey to make sure that she got her meds at night, and, you know, falls and all of that sort of stuff. She said, look, I've heard enough stories and I've seen enough situations of this occurring in her research to say, that's not happening here. So I'm going to take this off the table for you kids, which we were all obviously extraordinarily grateful that she did, you know, and, you know, learn the same lesson in terms of our, you know, what we'll do to make sure our children never have to go through that with us. It looked and felt, it was weird. It looked and felt to me like a fun college dormitory, as opposed to, you know, an assisted living facility. I mean, it did not, you know, it did not, so many of these places you go into them and you can just, it feels like God's little waiting room, you know, and this felt like, you know, I mean, you got places to do all kinds of different stuff, and we're going to allow you to have as much freedom and opportunity and places to hang around. It's all obviously well kept and those sorts of things. The apartments were surprisingly sort of bigger, much more well maintained and all of that sort of stuff than I might have expected they would be. But I mean, you know, a lot of these places now, they look more like, you know, it looks more like a courtyard at Marriott, you know, from Marriott, you know, as opposed to, you know, Ward 15, you know, yeah. She described it to us, because again, occurring during COVID, none of us could help, none of us could be involved, none of us could be part of that process. She described it in very happy terms and said that it occurred literally over a period of 2 or 3 hours, that folks helped and got everything up into a room and got it set up extremely quickly. That there were several pieces of furniture that she had to order that came in later. And when those would come in, somebody would sort of bring them up and set them up right away. And so it was much more seamless and far less chaotic. And I think she was probably done with the process 24 hours quicker than she'd anticipated it probably would have taken. Not sure I know how to answer that. I mean, I think that I would say people have gotten very, very good at making things look great on the internet. And you being a realtor can certainly appreciate that if you take the right 7 photographs, you know, you can make an outhouse look like Windsor Castle. And that, you know, caveat emptor, unless you can physically lay your eyes on the place, number one, and physically interact with and get a measure of the people who are, you know, running it and operating it. Because at the end of the day, you can live in the most beautiful facility with the finest appointments that exist, but if the people who are there are not committed caregivers, you know, you might as well be, you know, your life is not going to be very happy. I mean, I think I would say to you, pay attention to the people more than to the shiny objects.
For more information about this community, you can visit their profile at comfortlife.ca.